All right, hey everyone. In this video, we're going to be talking about stress and some of the main categories of things that cause stress, as well as some of the consequences of stress. I know that this is your second to last video before the Unit 1 exam, so you might be feeling some stress yourself at the moment. And well, I don't know if this is going to help with that or hurt that, but here we go. So, causes of stress. Stressors in general are just going to vary substantially based on severity. So, you can have certain stressors that are more just annoyances or hassles, things that just get on your nerves, like if someone's right next to you eating, chewing loudly, that can be something that's just a hassle and annoying, versus there can be extremely severe stressors like a hurricane coming to your city or a tornado, wiping out the house or other catastrophes of that nature. And so the first category of stressors I want to talk about is more on the hurricane line of things. And so the first section out of three is crises and catastrophes. And so these are the most severe stressors that you can think of. And with them being the most severe will also lead to the most severe consequences. One of those being PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. This is associated with things like, or symptoms such as anxiety, sleeplessness, nightmares, flashbacks, things of that nature. Oftentimes, this is thought of as something that just happens to those who go to war. It's the most common area that is associated with PTSD, but PTSD is not just a war veteran mental disorder. This can also come up when one is the victim of violent crimes or with natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, things like that. With an important thing to point out is that the effects of stressors is not just based on the intensity or the severity of those stressors. It also seems to matter how often those stressors come about. And so it's just a simple chart here. It was a study of combat veterans. And so as you can see, as there are more firefights or instances of violence, the likelihood of PTSD increased. And it's not always the case. As you can see, you're gonna, go off to war, have zero firefights, but still get PTSD. So it is a little bit dependent. But yeah, this is just to show that there is a combination here of intensity and frequency that lead to whatever the consequences might be. So on to the second category of stress. Again, we just talked about the crises and catastrophes. Also want to touch on life changes. And so this is kind of the middle of the road in terms of the stressor rankings. These are more moderate, although definitely don't want to take away from these. These can certainly be very stressful events. Some examples are divorce or marriage. I thought that was kind of interesting. I read something that actually at times marriage is rated as being as stressful as divorce, which is potentially a little bit surprising, because that's supposed to be, a real happy time, but it is a major life change. And a lot of different changes go into that, like just daily habits, living arrangements, having to move, handling of money, things like that. So a lot obviously does go along with marriage as well, but other life events such as job loss would fit under this category too. Another aspect that fits under this second category is various mental illnesses. And so talked about in the last video that the suicide rate in Wyoming is very high, and kind of correspondingly here, something that you might expect when you see that is that depression rates are very high for this area as well, and actually for the um, entire mountain or Rocky Mountain range here, there's seems to be quite a bit of issues with um, frequency of depressive episodes, especially between the ages of 8 and 25. And so there have been quite a few explanations put out there for why this might be. One of the main hypotheses is that this is tied into access to mental health care, which is more sparse in rural environments. And so the opportunities to get help with some mental health disorders, such as major depressive disorder, that's a bit more difficult to find in some of these areas where you see that the depression rates are really high. So on to the third category for causes of stress. We've talked about the crises and catastrophes. We've talked about life change being a little bit more moderate. Now we're going to just briefly go over hassles, which are the least severe of all the stressors. And so this just includes, oftentimes these hassles are daily events, right? So things happening at work that cause stress, relationship issues, various annoyances like the person chewing loudly, schoolwork, having a test later in the week, that's certainly a stressor. One stressor that fits under this category that might not be thought of too frequently, or at least personally, I don't really think about this too much, is environmental noise. And so, we, in this day and age, at least, typically if we're living in some sort of town or city, there's quite a bit of noise, right? Just all the time. And you can see that there are different levels to how much noise something gives off and how stressful that might be. So we have the pain threshold up here, where you're going to have potentially even hearing damage, versus down here, there's something as quiet as the rustling of the leaves or whispering or something like that. And then in the middle, we have just things like, conversation, cars here, telephones. So something to think about is on this level of zero noise to that's going to be painful to the ears, where do we think that the stress response begins? So in other words, when might we start to see increases in the amount of cortisol in the body, based on the amount of noise? There's not a direct answer to this, like 92.5, that's where you start to get stressed, but there is a general consensus that it's somewhere in that 90 to 100 range, noise starts to become pretty stressful. There's also some evidence that noise as low as in the 70 range can be stressful as well. So just kind of those conversations, really things that aren't that noisy and that we're going to be, especially in cities and towns, things that we're going to be dealing with on a daily basis. There's evidence that this can increase stress responses, which we talked about how HPA the HPA and things like cortisol going into the body can be really long term, which can be really detrimental to health. So that becomes a problem here when noises that aren't that loud do influence stress response, especially when those noises aren't going to go away. On to the crowd favorites of those in academia, but also obviously procrastination applies out of academia with things like getting work done for a job. But obviously we're all in the realm of classes currently where procrastination is a very big issue, and it has very meaningful relationships with stress. So as you can see here, this is just a study of college students, and stress symptoms were measured based on two categories, whether participants fit into more of a low procrastination category, more of a high procrastination category. As you can see, everyone towards the end of the semester, when there's more deadlines, final grades, all that, everybody gets more stressed. Maybe not everyone, but for the most part, on average, people are going to get more stressed at the end of the semester. But that's especially true for the high procrastinators, right? Who have pushed everything off to the end. Now they have to do it all. And so we see very high levels of stress for those high procrastinators, but it does depend on what the time period is, whether there's a lot of deadlines. Definitely those high procrastinators are going to tend to have more symptoms of stress around those deadlines than those who did not procrastinate. So that leads us into the effects of some of these stressors, and even just hassles in general can lead to what is called general adaptation syndrome. So basically, yeah, the question is, why are daily hassles a concern for well-being? It's something we deal with every day, right? Inherently being a daily hassle, so it can't be that bad. But the idea behind our body's stress response is that it should be adaptive, right? Our body should be designed and is designed to combat stressors. When the stress response is activated, it gets us ready to deal with that, whatever that stressor is. So awesome, that's good. But the issue comes when the stressors never go away. And so therefore that stress response is just staying there. That can then lead to those bad health consequences and becomes maladaptive as opposed to adaptive. And so what we see with the general adaptation syndrome, this is an important aspect for the class. So recommend that you take note here of the stages of general adaptation syndrome. And so the first is alarm. We see that stressor in the environment and we feel like, oh crap, I gotta go do this. You feel that those feelings of stress really come about. And then the second stage is resistance. And so this is when the mobilization of resources comes in, and where we, fitting for the name, try to resist that stressor. So we go and perform behaviors, actions to try and get that stressor to go away. So this is where we're mobilized, we're moving, we're acting. And yeah, we're working against that stressor there, resisting it. However, as just mentioned, especially with daily hassles, these stressors oftentimes don't completely go away. And when these stressors don't completely go away and we're forcing our body to stay in this resistance phase that's tiring for our body, we hit the stage 3, which is exhaustion. And it's this exhaustion phase that can be really detrimental to our physical and mental health. So what might happen in the exhaustion phase? Well, we can see a few different effects broadly. This does seem to have a large impact on our immune system. And so some physical symptom or systems that are influenced by this exhaustion phase are increased likelihood of cold and flu, more headaches, more neck and shoulder aches, more stomach aches, nausea, sweating, and sleep disturbance. We'll talk about how important sleep is in a bit. And so there are also psychological systems that are influenced by this, such as when in this exhaustion phase, you're going to see more anxiety, more depression, higher rates of irritability, more negative as opposed to positive emotions. And all this is just making your cognitive resources depleted, which is leading to things like forgetfulness. And yeah, then the combination of these physical and psychological symptoms can really wear down us as humans. And that can lead to behaviors that are easy for us, that feel good in the moment because we're tired of feeling bad, right? We're exhausted, but that are not healthy for the long run, like alcohol use, drug use, poor diet, not enough rest, and passive behavior. So a lot of this stuff especially cold, flu, negative emotions, all that. You do see in the realm of academia, these oftentimes we'll see spikes in these things towards the end of semesters when there's a lot of deadlines. So this is just a simple study kind of emphasizing aspects of that last slide where duration influences likelihood of getting a cold. And so in this study, participants were asked, how many months have you experienced, X stressor for? And then participants were exposed to a cold virus. I don't know if you'd, I'm actually not positive. I'll have to look back up what the date of the study is, but I feel like you'd have a pretty tough time getting this one past the review board these days. But anyways, the main finding was just that the risk of cold increases with the duration of that stressor. And the idea is that that's due to just being in that exhaustion phase for longer periods of time. So sleep deprivation, said a couple slides ago, we'd be talking about this a bit more. Just want to point out how important sleep is. It is one of the most important things that we do as humans. I know that it's definitely easier said than done to get the proper amount of sleep, but it's just one example of brain differences with sleep and no sleep. And so sleep does have sleep deprivation does have very large consequences on both cognitive functioning and physical health. And so the importance of this for this section is that a lack of sleep oftentimes stems from stress in a couple of ways. So you can be really stressed because you procrastinated your deadlines tomorrow and you have so many things to do that you pull an all-nighter, cram it all in, and miss your sleep for that night. This can also happen though, just because you're stressed and you're worried, and that can keep you from sleeping as well. So this is an image of your brain on meth, or in other words, while these brain images were taken, people were working on some arithmetic problems. So this is normal sleep. On top, you can see how active the brain is here in a wide variety of areas, versus on the bottom, 35 hours of no sleep, not much going on. So large cognitive impairments there with 35 hours of no sleep. Just quickly, some other, I won't go over all these, so you all can just glance at this, but just some other effects of sleep deprivation. Again, those cognitive impairments, symptoms can oftentimes be similar to those of ADHD. Additionally, with consistent lack of sleep, physical symptoms can get as bad as increased risk of heart disease, definitely decreased reaction time. And yeah, we can go through the rest of those. Effects on the heart. So you see here that we'll talk more about personality later in the class, but I do just want to point out that personality type definitely influences how much stress each person feels on a daily basis. So there's evidence that this type A personality, which is associated with more of a competitive drive, time urgency, things like hostility and anger, as well as cynicism. Those type A personalities, at least in men, I'm not sure about women, but at least in men, this does, by a long shot, increase the probability of coronary heart disease. Continuing on here, so why might this influence, why might type A influence the risk of heart disease? The main hypothesis for that is that things like consistent hostility and anger, which is seen in those type A personalities, are quick to do that. That is frequently highly associated with some of those heart problems and health issues. Other important factors, though, we might see less health consciousness, not always, but might see less health consciousness in those with type A personalities due to, again, that competitive nature, feeling of anger, and just more of like a go, go, go. So these This personality is typically under more time pressure, and when under more time pressure, things like exercise, eating well, diet, all of that becomes less likely when under time pressure, which those with the type A personality are more commonly under. So that is it for the second video here. We'll talk in the next one. It'll definitely be a shorter video, and we'll talk about how we go about coping with certain stressors and issues.